Call from a correctional may be monitored and recorded.
I apologize. My name is Madeline Michelle Carthen. I'm going to be your host tonight, facilitating. We have several guests tonight that's going to be speaking in reference to what's going on in South Central Correctional Center down in Lincoln, Missouri. I'll give you an introduction of myself. Again, I am Madeline Michelle Carthen, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I started out as a chaplain. Excuse me. I went to St. Louis Christian College and then over to Eden Seminary. My externship was done at the workhouse, City Jail. I was under the mentorship at the time to get my school credits, Mrs. Penny Hubbard. She was a volunteer coordinator Tech 2 at the time before she became a state representative. And so I just worked my way through that process of being a chaplain, taking over from Michael Chaplain at the time. And it just allowed me to be more involved with families, seeing what was going on in the workhouse as a student chaplain. It was just a lot of things that I wasn't in agreement with. I didn't really know the protocol of how things supposed to work. I just knew that the abuse and the cruelty that I was seeing taking place with the correctional guards, with the men and women that were down there, it wasn't right. And so that allowed me to get more involved on the advocacy side. In regards to the prison and the policies in itself, working with state representatives, working with so many state representatives that was on the Public Safety Department of Corrections Committee. I learned a lot, how bills are written, what it takes to sponsor a bill. And that got me more involved with getting the actual prison residents as I was going into the prisons, working with the, the prisoners in St. Louis County, dealing with just the child support issues at that time with a gentleman named Mr. Halbert Sullivan over at Father Support Center. That was able to allow me to understand the bureaucracy of the Missouri Department of Correction and those that were involved, again, such as the lawmakers. In regards to that, it gave me a sense of knowing that I couldn't just be your regular chaplain to go through pushing the cart, giving spiritual paraphernalia to the prison residents. I really had to get involved, and I did. And there was a gentleman. He was on death row. His name was he's on the call now, Reginald Clemens. I got with his family. I was introduced to his mother, Miss Vera Thomas, and it was during that time I really seen the ugliness, the wickedness that takes place within the Department of Corrections and the things that happen. And I'll give you an example before I get into what we're going to be talking about tonight. I had a bad experience as a chaplain at Potosi Correction Center back in 2011. My life was threatened by Quad C Gang. Quad C Gang was comprised of 4 correctional guards with the last names of C. I had all kind of paraphernalia that was mailed out, snitch, excuse my French, snitch nigger, oatmeal with scrapple glass mailed to me in my personal mailbox through the mail, threat calls, all these things that was happening, all because I was trying to help. It was a total of 32 men that were being abused there, and I was getting all the IRRs. And it caused me to become very proactive to get the FBI, the St. Louis Division involved, Special Agent Timothy Feeney. He was very instrumental in this process with me. We had to go with Reddit Hudson as well as Reverend Elston McGowan. They were both with ACLU and NAACP at the time. And we went to the prison to talk with Troy Steele, who was the warden at that time, to find out what was going on based upon the information that was given to me that I had turned over to the authorities. Of course, I was made to look like the villain, like I was inciting a riot. It was told slanderous things that they didn't have documentation. I was making this up, but I had receipts, which I always do. Knowing, going through the process, I've learned always keep your receipts. And that's what I gave over to everybody that was in the meeting. I gave over 32 IRR and grievances, which was the pink copy. So the yellow and the white copy was missing. And that is what caused the extensive investigation. Of course, it broke up. Quad C Gang there at Potosi. Some of the guys like Reginald Clemens himself was able to get out of ADSIG. It was a lot of bad things going on there. And so that's how I became part of not just being a chaplain on one end, but working directly with the families making sure that things are kept in perspective in regards to Chapter 217, the revised version of what the policies and procedures are when it comes to the Department of Correction. Before I go into further, I want to bring up about the issues that we're going to be talking about today, and that's going to be about Licking Town, where the actual South Central Correction Center is located. We're going to be speaking on behalf of the correctional officers, the culture there, and then also we're going to be speaking about the murder of prison resident Michael Hudson that took place back in December 15th of 2023. As we begin the conversation, as I go further into this, I want to turn things over to Latrell. He's going to come on and he's going to give further information in regards to how we're moving forward with the talk about South Central Correction Center.
Thank you for using Securus.
I turn it over to Latrell.
All right, thank you very much. We're all used to hearing those sounds when we do this work. So my name is Latrell Stanton. I am the lead organizer for EXPO, ex-Incarcerated People Organizing. And I want to tell you guys about how this work developed over just building relationships in Missouri DOC. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Bear with me. So, about a year ago, I began speaking with prisoners, inmates inside of the Department of Corrections. Slowly but surely, you know, I was speaking to inmates inside of Pacific, as well as JCCC. But with each inmate I would hear from, I would kind of start to hear things about Licking in general. Just in passing, the reputation that Licking had as a prison. I started hearing that people would want to transfer, and they were making sure that they created an enemy list in Licking so they would not actually have to go back to the prison. So that kind of focused me on South Central Corrections as a facility. So when I started to look into South Central Corrections, and there were several campaigns going on in the state around the prison debts, I began to see that Licking Prison was probably the worst case scenario. And so to express that to you, I just want to tell you guys a few facts that we found out about South Central Correctional Center. All right, so since the beginning of 2023, South Central Correctional Center has had about 30 deaths. That's far above what the national average would be. This year already, Licking has had 10 plus deaths already, and we're only in August. And so just to put that in perspective, on the average, these are the averages for the type of deaths that you have per incarcerated person. So per 1,000 incarcerated people, there's only 1.4 deaths that occur annually around the whole country. So even without reading the rest of the statistics, you can see that there's a vast difference between what's going on in Missouri in general, and also what's going on in South Central Corrections in particular. So as I began to talk with people inside of South Central Corrections facilities and get acquainted to the different things that were going on, I began to break down the deaths into different categories. You would have overdoses, you would have suicides, you would have instances of violence. So I had already heard that Licking Prison was one of the more violent prisons there. And in that time is when I heard about just a horrible, horrible case of Michael Hudson. And I began to talk to people about how it could have been prevented. But there's also cases of overdoses and suicides. And so when I would call reporters or try to call the facility, what would happen was people would say that, well, the only reason why we have all of these deaths is because of natural causes, because there's an aging prison population. So I began to look at that, and I began to look at how the procedures were done to declare somebody's death as a natural cause. And this is really what we want to talk about, and this is what we want to kind of break the seal on today. is that MDOC tries to hide their misconduct, bad care of the inmates. They try to hide it under the natural causes. We know that basically the county where Licking is, Texas County, is a county that has a drug problem and an addiction problem. And that addiction problem finds its way on the inside of prisons, despite the fact that they actually stopped allowing physical mail. And the reason they gave for that was that that's how the drugs were coming in. They have stopped that physical mail, yet the drugs continue to flow and you continue to see overdoses. And so we're here to kind of talk about why that happens. Also, if I can just regress, suicides. We don't know that suicides a lot of times are linked to the drug crisis as well. Because when you take someone in off the street that have a drug issue, and then they have to detox, and a lot of times they're put in solitary confinement. A lot of times those actual inmates end up killing themselves, detoxing, or you have poor mental health facilities in the prison, of course, and that also can lead to suicides and violence and overdoses. Now, I say that just to say that all of these deaths can be put up the label as prison-attributed deaths is a more accurate term. So, for example, when it comes to natural causes, if you are a diabetic and you're in prison and you die due to the fact that you weren't given your insulin, they are going to label that as natural causes. But there's actually nothing natural about that, since that was a treatable disease that could have been treated if there wasn't a total disregard for the life of the inmate. That is not a natural cause. The same thing goes for hepatitis C. Hepatitis C, which is a disease that is easily treatable on the outside. Hundreds of inmates die from the fact that state governments don't have the money, don't want to spend the money to treat hepatitis C patients in prison. A lot of times, once they try to say that treatment is based on the most need, and a lot of times once they determine that you need the hepatitis C medication, it's already too late. And this goes on and on. So we want to break the misnomer of people that say, well, it's just because of aging prison population and these are natural causes. They're only able to hide those deaths under natural causes because of the bureaucracy, because of the way that the prison system guards information and doesn't allow transparency, is why they are able to attribute most of these deaths to natural causes. So yes, with that said, right, tonight we're going to be speaking about the systematic issues that come together that cause these prison attributed deaths, whether it's violence, whether it's bad medical treatment, whether it's bad food, whether it's lack of medical care. These prisons, these deaths are the responsibility of Missouri DOC, the warden, and the state of Missouri. And the prison deaths have risen to such a level that we can no longer sit by and let them to file these cases into natural causes as a justification for these outrageous death numbers. So with that said, we're going to pass it along to Miss Madeline. She's going to be speaking with a townsperson that I met along my journey.
Thank you, Latrell. As we move forward in procession, I conducted an interview with a town member, but before we go into that, I'm going to have Latrell to go ahead and show some stats in regards to Licking Town. It is known as Texas County. Missouri. We're looking at like the median income level there, the actual graduation rate, the addiction rate, and the employment rate and the population that is currently right now in Lincoln, Missouri. So doing the research here, um, it was very important that we show these stats to give you a picture of and an understanding of what is actually happening, that you have more incarcerated in the prison as it's growing to almost reach the amount of the town population. And the majority of the prison population it's coming from other jurisdictions, from like St. Louis, the Jackson County, Columbia area, Cape Girardeau. So they're coming from all over. That makes up the prison population there. And of course, the median income being below average. Going into talking with the town person, are you there?
She is here. Let me
Okay.
unmute her. One second.
Okay. And the reason why we thought that it was good that we would be in agreement with having the town person on with her consent, wanting to just give us a inside look of what goes on down there on a day-to-day basis, given the fact that she's been there pretty much all her life, as she stated.
Oh,
Do
she's
we have
there.
her on
She's
the?
there.
Is she on?
I'm there, Miss Madeline.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I wanted to ask you, to just give our audience today a background of who you are, meaning the atmosphere, how long you've been down there, in the Texas County area. Just give us a little background of that.
I have lived in Texas County, Licking area my entire life. It's just a small country town, very rural, where we all just kind of band together.
Okay. So with saying that, does that mean like everyone knows everybody? Would it be in such a small town population?
We do. As everybody has gotten older,
Okay.
most people have stayed together with their families. So everybody knows everybody.
Okay. So how many people do you encounter that work at SCC, South Central Correction Center, or may have resigned from working there, given the fact that it's such a small town? Do you know that right offhand, given the fact that everyone knows everyone?
I would say at least half of the people that I encounter, um, we, I know at least half of them have worked or still work for SCCC.
Okay. So given the fact of that, would you say, if it is it fair to say, shall I say, that with everyone knowing everyone and it being a small town, and that's like the biggest thing down there as far as employment, job security, things of that nature, would you say that there could be a possibility of nepotism that has taken place or could be taking place?
Absolutely. I feel like the so it's a lot of family that work together inside the prison system. And with that being said, family band together.
Okay.
So I would say yes, there is a whole lot of nepotism.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Given the fact what Latrell, he had showed some stats in regards to the opiate, excuse me, problems down there. Um, What would you say, just in your opinion, as a townsperson growing up down there, what is the talk about in regards to the drug problem there, and what is it considered as when it comes to the prison?
Um, there is a major drug problem in Texas County alone. So with drugs making the way into a secured environment, it has people scratching their head. Um, how is something so bad, so deadly, making its way into a secured facility?
Okay. And this, if I may say, and I don't know if you may know this or not, but how do the township people view, the people that are like fired for maybe having brought drugs in, as a worker, or say the ones that just don't want to deal with any of, say, the corruption or the bullying as workers to be part of whatever going on, and they resign? How are they treated? Is there a variance, a difference?
There is a difference. If they are walked out, per se,
From a correctional facility and may be monitored
people
and recorded.
people view them differently. And it doesn't just affect the employee, but the family as well. They look at them as if they have done something wrong, and the prison may not even have all the facts. It could just be rumor.
Mhm. So given the fact that with the drug situation that's going on down there, what is it actually like for as the job hiring? Like if it is in that capacity, or are they like that you may know of? I don't know if you know or not, but do they like drug test for these correctional guards to get the jobs to work there?
They do not drug test. As a matter of fact, I know several active addicts that have went to work at the prison, one overdosed at the prison and was walked out. So no, they do not drug test.
Hmm. So going back to what you were stating, and I think that's very important for our audience to understand in regards to the culture of the environment there at South Central Correction Center when it comes to either those being caught with drugs that are COs, or those that just don't want to deal with, let's just say, the environment in itself, not knowing that that's what they were being hired for, to be part of that culture, and to know that there's a term that's going around that I didn't even know. And I've been a chaplain for 30 years within the Department of Correction. But this is something, have you heard of the term hug a thug?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
And to my understanding, I just want to get some clarity. I know that after my talk with you, we have a ex-correctional officer that will go into a lot of the culture there, being a part of it and having to resign. But when this is talked about, is it talked about in the township, since everyone knows everyone? And does it bring some type of ostracizing to that person or their family? Like, do you know how that work, or have you heard any rumors of like that happening?
Yes, yes, it happens a lot. Um, the Johnny talks to this one, Johnny talks to that one, and before you know it, um, Johnny, who may work inside the prison, has slandered little Joey here all over town, and everybody looks at them differently.
Mm. And I can see where that would kind of cause a like a better analogy, a Hatfield-McCoy kind of situation, families coming against families, who's snitching or all of that kind of stuff. I can see where that can come in at causing problems for the individual. But when it comes to the hiring process, and I know, I heard what you said in regards to, that being looked upon as, where a lot of people look to go because of the job security in that regard. Has there ever
I
been
lost
any?
you, Miss Madeline. If you can't hear me,
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can, but apparently there's some
Oh,
type of
there we
communication.
go.
Okay.
I
So
I got you.
I want to go through one more question with you before we get this wrapped up, before I go into the next section. My main question to you, given the fact that all of these things that has been stated that you are aware of, being in the environment, living there, has there ever been any type of like town hall meetings with the residents in the community that is just, fed up with the opiate problems there and the things that is taking place within the Department of Corrections, South Central, with the deaths and things of that? Have you heard anything like that happening as a
No,
community?
no. There has not been any kind of town hall meeting. I
Okay.
kind of feel like it's a concern to people, but nobody is willing to stand up and take a stand to say,
Yeah.
hey, what is going on?
Right. Right. And I guess that goes back to the term of the hug a thug. I really want people to understand, that's listening in on this, the type of culture that is internal, not from the prison residents. Can you give a description, like what does hug a thug mean, literally?
So if you become a CO there and you have compassion and you are trying to steer the residents in the right direction and you show compassion and you're not there to be mean or fight, pepper spray, whatever goes on. If you don't do any of that, well, then you're considered a hug a thug. They think you're being too close with the residents.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that brings me to my next statement in regards to our next guest. Let me put that. We have a ex-correctional officer, Dana, that is going to be coming up to speak next. Dana, are you there?
I'm
And I want
here.
to thank you, Miss Town person. Can you still hear me? Is the town person still available? I just wanted to thank her for being courageous to give that information. Um, Dana, I want to go ahead and speak with you, if it's okay. If you would just, give an introduction of yourself, give a summary of the time that you've worked within the Department of Correction and why you left. And just give us a picture of the culture, of what's a day-to-day like being a correctional officer working there at South Central Correctional Center. And what are you doing now with the ex-correctional officers, the organization that you started? I want you to, go into that. So I know I'm cluttering you with a lot right now, but I just want you to go ahead and let the audience know who you are.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dana. As was mentioned, I am a former corrections officer at South Central Correctional Center. I worked there a couple of years ago and I did quit, but I since then have, of course, not forgotten about my time there. So I really do want to talk about that. I'd like to think and hope that most would go into a job like being a corrections officer for the right reasons, that they really want to make a difference. But in rural areas like this, as was mentioned, where there aren't many jobs, where there's not really many options, a lot of times it really isn't for the right reasons that people become corrections officer or prison staff in general. I, like many, applied because I really did need a job. I had moved here from Wisconsin. It was kind of a culture shock to begin with, and I really couldn't find a decent paying job. So when I applied at the prison, I thought, well, it's better pay and benefits than any of the other jobs that were close by. And I thought, well, maybe I really could make a difference. I had been a caregiver for many years. I had done that for quite a few years. And I thought, well, this would be along those lines. After all, the Missouri Department of Corrections mission statement says, the Missouri Department of Corrections supervises and provides rehabilitative services to adult offenders in correctional institutions and Missouri communities to enhance public safety. So I thought, well, that sounds like that would be nice. I'd love to help rehabilitate offenders. And then, of course, it goes on to talk about their vision, that we believe in the ability of people to change. We value the opportunity to work with offenders in our institutions and our communities to provide them with the tools necessary to become productive, tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. We strive to be firm, fair, and consistent in our institutional management and use effective and appropriate supervision strategies in our communities. So I thought, this is right up my alley. I would love to be part of this kind of a community that helps rehabilitate and help offenders become law-abiding citizens. But after I started, after a short time in there, I realized, boy, was I wrong. Missouri prisons have nothing to do with rehabilitation. So after seeing how inadequate and disheartening it is to be a person who wants to make a difference in a broken system with coworkers who don't have your back and treat prison residents as subhuman, I had enough and I quit. But after working there for the time I did, I couldn't unsee the things I had seen. I couldn't sleep at night. I needed to do something, or at least let someone who could do something know what was going on in there. And that's when I met Latrell from EXPO St. Louis. And he had already been in contact with others who were impacted, others who were in prison, ex-incarcerated individuals, and even others who, like me, were former corrections staff or those with experience in the Department of Corrections. And along with him and who he had connected with and who I was starting to connect with, others who felt like me, we came to the conclusion that staff culture, CO culture, especially the custody staff culture, really contributes to the inhumane treatment, incompetence, and complacency that is prevalent in the Department of Corrections. The corrections officers, they have the most direct impact on the prison residents. They have the most contact with them. They are the ones that can determine whether a resident lives or dies, whether they get medical treatment, whether they get their needs and rights met. And so a lot of people don't realize how very important it is to have competent custody staff. The attitudes of indifference, it just permeates South Central Correctional Center. This includes a lack of empathy. There's a lot of racism, abuse of power, indifference, and pure incompetency. Prison residents are completely helpless, voiceless, and are at the mercy of staff members, especially the correctional officers. Caseworkers and medical staff are a close second and third. Since they have the most direct impact and contact with the prison residents. And if you do want to be one of the good ones, sadly, you're going to be severely outnumbered and not very popular. It starts from the day you get hired. Did you know that all it takes to get hired as a corrections officer is one thing? You have to be 18 years old. That's it. You don't have to have a drug test. You don't have to have an education. You don't have to have any credentials, no mental health evaluation, no fitness test. These are literally kids coming in here with no experience and no common sense most of the time because of that lack of experience. There's 18-year-old girls coming into a level 5 male prison. We can imagine how that could go. There's very little training, basically no training on policy and procedures. There's 3 weeks of very basic training. And then you get to the prison and you get some on-the-job training, but I'm going to go into that a little bit more. But when you get in the prison, you quickly realize that you're not going to be making a difference. Your only job as a corrections officer is supposed to be to provide safety and security for the prison residents and your fellow officers. You take an oath on your last day of academy to protect those under your stewardship. Your job is not to judge or punish. But I'd be willing to bet that those prison residents feel anything but safe and secure and regularly feel judged and punished. If you don't fit in with their attitudes or culture and go along with their way of doing things, you will be an outsider. If you have compassion for the prison residents, you're talked about and the rumors start flying, and you're automatically put under investigation. If you treat the prison residents like human beings instead of the scum of the earth, then you'll get labeled as a hug-a-thug and talked about relentlessly. As a female officer, if you don't write up tons of bogus violations and aren't sleeping with a captain, then you're probably not going to get promoted. Within my first weeks there, I was getting inappropriate Facebook messages from a captain and was later targeted by this captain after not reciprocating. I did see a lot of terrible things go on and that were allowed to go on at South Central Correctional Center. In fact, I could go on and on for hours about the things I saw. But for the sake of time, I'd like to talk about one experience that pretty much encompasses everything that's wrong with that institution. So when you first start there, you do job shadowing or on-the-job training, OJT as it's called. You train in all the parts of the institution, including the segregation housing units or administrative segregation, AKA the hole. The hole is always full. The men are in cages 23 to 24 hours a day. They get out maybe once a week for a shower, maybe once a week for a shower. And they're supposed to get out for an hour a week in another cage outside for recreation. These men depend on the officers, the caseworkers, and the medical staff for all their needs. So the first thing you're taught when you start getting trained to work the hole is don't give them too much attention or you'll have to do things for them. If you stop to talk to them, they will ask you for things and they don't really need anything. They just want your attention. There are duress buttons they can push if they have an emergency. The button will light up on the switchboard if it's pushed, and those duress calls are supposed to be answered. An officer is supposed to go to that cell to see what they need. You're flat out told, don't bother answering those duress calls or you'll be running around all day. But you're supposed to be doing walks every 25 minutes as well to physically check on the prison residents. But you're told, just make it look good on the cameras. As long as you're doing your walks, you'll be okay. I witnessed men whose cellmates were overdosing in their cells who said they had been calling for help for a whole shift and nobody came. They said they'd pushed the duress button for a whole shift and nobody came. I've witnessed men having medical emergencies and nobody came or called for medical personnel. I witnessed men being taken out of their cells dead because the shift before never checked on them. I witnessed nurses literally telling inmates that unless they were bleeding, dying, or had a limb falling off, it wasn't an emergency. One man had shingles for 2 weeks before he was seen by a nurse, but he didn't even know that's what he had. He literally thought he was dying. He had excruciating pain, and then he broke out in a rash. And for 2 weeks, he had been trying to be seen by medical. The officers ignored him. He put in 2 HSRs, or health service requests. And a nurse finally, when he finally saw a nurse, said, she never got those. She never got those HSRs. So he couldn't be seen because she hadn't gotten an HSR. And if he wasn't bleeding, dying, or had a limb falling off, it wasn't an emergency. Can you imagine being locked in a cage at the mercy of people who don't care if you live or die? Not knowing if you may be dying from some rare disease, mentally preparing yourself for the worst, and not even being able to tell your family or friends? This man was finally seen by a fluke for an HSR he had put in weeks before for a hangnail. And that's when they finally told him he had shingles. A little late, don't you think? And what if he had been dying? You can bet he has mental health issues after this incident, and probably PTSD, to be honest. I've witnessed inmates being taken out of their cells stiff as a board because they were denied medical treatment, either by the corrections officer, medical staff, or both. I've witnessed whole bottles of pepper spray being emptied into a cell through the food port because a CO didn't like the way they were talked to by a guy who's already locked in a cell. I mean, what's the point? The chemical replacing the air in the cell while the men in the cell are screaming that they can't breathe. I've witnessed men chained to a bench while they wait for a cell when they first get to the hole, chained and shackled for 2 full days sometimes, not getting any food, not being able to lay down to sleep, not even being able to stand up to stretch. And then the caseworkers, they do everything they can to avoid having to actually do their jobs. And I'm sorry to put it that way, but that is the truth. And especially when in the hole, the prison residents depend on the caseworkers for almost everything. If they need a medical slip or an HSR slip, the caseworker needs to get that to them. If they need an IRR slip or an internal review request slip to appeal their violations, the caseworker needs to get that to them as well. And those are time sensitive. They have a certain amount of time to appeal their violations. So if they don't get them on time, or if they're lost, they have no way of actually doing that. And this brings me to one point. The prison residents have tablets. They have tablets, and they were told that when they first got their tablets that they would have a way to submit these things on their tablets, but that never happened. They were told that they would be able to put a request in to be seen by medical on their tablets, but it never happened. So the way it stands, it's all done with paper. It gets lost, never gets given to them. It's their word against whoever else was supposed to be getting it done. Like I said, I could go on and on. Nurses who literally hate the prison residents and make it very well known that they want nothing to do with them. They avoid having to see them or treat them at all costs. Almost every medical incident that happens there, at least in the last couple of years, they just assume it's a drug overdose. They won't even assess them. They just hit them with Narcan. And this person could be having a heart attack, a stroke. And what happens when you hit someone with Narcan that's not actually overdosing? And then they're just taken to the hole instead of taken to medical for assessment. I constantly get family members of prison residents at Licking Prison, or family members of those who have died at Licking Prison, and the stories that they tell you would make you cry. One man has been in prison for 40 years. He's 70 years old, in a wheelchair, and going blind. He tells his sister, "You need to get me out of here. I'm going to die." He says this is the worst prison he's been in, and he's been to quite a few in Missouri. Since he moved to SCCC from JCCC, or South Central Correctional Center from Jefferson County Correctional Center Jefferson City Correctional Center over 2 years ago. He hasn't been getting his medications regularly. His medical needs have been neglected. The nurse, she just stopped taking the sister's calls and basically ignores everything that's asked of her. And this sister really feels like her brother will end up dying there. And this is just one of the many heartbreaking stories. The daughter of a man who died on December 29th, she wrote to the mother of Michael Hudson, who was stabbed to death a couple of weeks earlier. And I'd like to read what she wrote. So her father died on December 29th, and she wrote to Michael Hudson's mother. And she said, I'm sorry. She said, "Can you please contact me? My father was in jail with your son. He called home angry because he said the jail staff did nothing and sat back and let your son get stabbed for over 5 minutes, and the COs did nothing. My dad was scared and said something about don't trust them. And I have emails. My dad died December 29th. My family is in shock, and we're waiting on the autopsy and hiring a lawyer. My dad was, I'm not going to say his name, but he had just turned 59 years old, and he's dead after asking for a transfer because they watched your son get killed. Sorry, ma'am, for your loss, but I had to tell you my dad's last words."
Thank you, Lena.
I'm sorry, I have a little bit more here.
Okay.
But I just wanted to mention that because those are the kind of stories that you'll hear when you talk to those who have experience with South Central Correctional Center. So what do we want to see happen? What do I want to see happen? We want to see a change to the hiring process and requirements, better training on policy and consequences and accountability for not following those procedures, better systems for prison residents to log complaints, file grievances, submit medical requests, and an outside entity that will follow up and hold the prison responsible for getting these things handled. This accountability should include caseworkers since they are responsible for the day-to-day needs of the inmates. And when they are complacent or just plain lazy, prison residents miss deadlines, don't get their due process, when they're appealing violations, etc. We need procedures for inmates to get their medical needs met and for them to have their voices heard if those needs aren't met. Accountability and transparency of staff members who fall short or violate the policy and procedure. And ultimately, the warden needs to answer for what's going on at her prison and what she's allowing to go on. Collectively changing corrections. That's what our group is called. We will work together with lawmakers, policymakers, legislators, and even the governor to get these changes made. Join us in making a change. We're just getting started.
Thank you for that. I have a few questions I want to ask you based upon the information that you were given. I know it was a lot. I just wanted to go over, you were talking about the HSR. And for some of those that may not know what that acronym is for, can you go into just briefly giving us an understanding of how does the HSR work with the nurses and caseworkers, and who do they report to? Like, who's the medical vendor that they're working with?
So the HSR is the health service request, and it's basically just a little piece of paper that the prison residents will write what their medical needs are, and they need to then get that to to the nurses. The nurses come around and pick those up like in the hole, or there's a box they can put them in the other housing units. And so the nurses are then responsible for making sure that those get logged and that they actually see the residents that need to be seen. Centurion is the medical vendor, basically.
Sure.
But it's still,
Mhm.
and that changed recently, but it's still the same medical personnel, same nurses, same doctor. That hasn't
Mhm.
changed.
Mhm. So when you spoke in regards to those that were dealing with the in the ADSEG being on the bench situation, I heard you talk about the food service. They wasn't getting food and things like that. What was the food service like with you being working there? Like the quality of the food and the condition of the kitchen, so to speak.
Well, that's a good question for me because I actually worked in the kitchen and I saw some pretty appalling situations, from bugs in the food, from spoiled food, from just downright disgustingness where equipment breaks down and it just sits there with food rotting in it. Um, Half the time they don't have bags to put in the garbage can, so they just throw the garbage in the garbage bins, and then when it's taken out, that food is just still rotting in there if it gets even rinsed out. Um,
Mhm.
they I don't know if this is the case anymore because there's a different food vendor, but when I worked there, there was actual packaged food that said on it not for human consumption.
Mhm.
And that's what they fed the prison residents. And there's the trash compactor outside is filthy, disgusting. It breaks down constantly and just sits there with garbage just piled up out of it, rotting, rats, maggots, disgusting. And then there's a back room right behind where they store the food that if they have an overflow of garbage that they can't get in the trash compactor, they just pile it up in there, rats, maggots, all of that. It's just absolutely disgusting.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Wow. The nepotism. What have you witnessed regarding nepotism within the internal part of the facility while you were there working as a correctional guard?
Well, I mean, pretty much everybody is related to everybody. And if not, they've gone to school with them. They're just, it's, and if you come in from not being from this area, you feel like an outsider right away. And you know that you're never going to stand up against anything that they want to get done or anything that they want to be doing.
Mhm.
There's at least 10 husbands and wives I can think of right offhand that both work there. They they spend their time on the phones with each other instead of doing their jobs. Uh,
Mhm.
they they will stand up for each other even if one of them's not is doing something wrong. Um, they they will stand up for each other when things are uh, like violations are written, and instead of really seeing if it was a valid violation, they'll just stand up for the family member or the friend because
Okay.
that's what they do. It's almost like a cult, honestly.
Mm. Yeah. Um, this last question before we go into our next segment, I wanted to ask you because this really bothered me when that derogatory term "hug a thug." Now I know that the town person did speak on it, from a town person, not being on the inside, but you working there. What was that like? Like, were you ever termed that because doing your job, or how did that work?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because if you aren't willing to write tons of violations or treat them like they're not human, then then that's the term they use, hug a thug. You must you must like them more than your fellow officers, or you you have no uh, yeah, it's terrible. You're really talked about. The rumors start flying. You're literally put on. Almost every female officer that doesn't go in there and be absolutely horrible to the inmates is put under investigation
By who?
by the GOC, by basically by the prison, by the administration at the prison, the
Okay.
warden.
I see. I see. Okay. Well, I want to thank you for giving me your time and giving that as an explanation to give more understanding of the terminology in itself. Because, like I said, 30 years, I've never heard that term in itself.
Yeah, there's other terms I've heard that they used to use that honestly I'd rather be called a hug-a-thug, but it's still terrible.
I understand. Thank you, Dana. As we move forward, so now we have an actual inmate over there at South Central Correctional Center. He's on the line. His name is Robert Goodwin. He said he didn't mind having his name being stated. He was an actual witness to what happened to Michael Hudson. But before he speaks about it, I would like to ask him about the ADSEG. Mr. Robert Goodwin, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Thank you, sir, for being present for this time. I wanted to ask you if you could just take a brief moment, being where you are right now. Let us know where you are currently. Like, are you in ADSEG? Are you in general population? And give us an idea, like paint a picture for us to know what actually the ADSEG bench is all about, the dry cell.
Okay. At the moment, I'm actually in general population. I'm doing well at the moment. ADSEG is if you're not used to prison, and when you come here, whether or not you're incarcerated or not, it's very dim, like dark as soon as you go in, because it's filthy and often full of smoke, because inmates like to get high in their cell off of some paper substance, laced with chemicals and stuff. They call it K2 or whatnot. But so that's your first impression when you go down there. It's loud, people yelling through the doors to speak to one another. They initially put you in a cage, which has a port for you to remove your handcuffs and whatnot. Then you strip out. They see whether or not you're holding any contraband. They shake your clothes loose, see if there's any weapons and whatnot. Then they'll cuff you to a bench and shackle you to the bench, which is a metal bench. It's long enough for about 2 or 3 inmates. They tend to your feet have shackles on them, and they have a handcuff that is cuffed to the bench, and then will be cuffed around the chain of the shackles, and the handcuffs that got your handcuffs behind your back are then handcuffed to the bench while you sit down. They're behind your back. Handcuffs are then cuffed to the bench. And you typically wait there until they feel like there's a cell open. I mean, obviously there's a space for you to go in a cell, but it's all a matter of them assigning you a cell and getting you in there. So you'll stay there for every 2 hours. There's supposed to be a bathroom break, which oftentimes they will give you the bathroom break. They'll escort you to a restroom that's a cell that's designed for that. But after that, they usually sit you right back down, and it's the policy they said is 5 hours before they'll remove you from the bench and place you inside a holding cage for another 2 to 5 hours. And if you're not in a cell by then, they say they're supposed to put you back on the bench for up to another 5 hours. But most of the time, they don't remove you from the bench after that 5 hours. They usually try to let you sit there as long as they can get away with, unless you start throwing a fit. And depending on their mood, they might mace you to get you to be quiet and comply, by not yelling and pitching a fit. And it becomes painful when you're sitting there after the first hour and a half. Your shoulders tense up, your back muscles start to spasm.
Sure.
If the cuffs are too tight, it's hard to get an officer to sit still long enough to help you out, to loosen them up or anything. The nurse doesn't come to check on you. They're supposed to have a nurse come check on you every 2 hours per policy, but you don't really see a nurse unless you have a medical emergency. Then that can take a while. There's really nothing you can do. Most of the time, it's just a lot of anxiety, and after a couple hours, you just get real frustrated and you're in pain, and you know, you just start yelling and being upset with the officer, or you be just sit there in agony and be quiet because you're just angry and just disturbed. You don't even want to talk. You're just mad.
I understand.
So that's
Well, if you don't
typically your
mind,
average experience on the bench at ANSA.
if you don't mind,
Going in.
can you give us an understanding of you being a witness to what happened to Michael Hudson before we go into bringing his mother on? Can you give a recount of the story of what happened?
Yeah. I can tell you, it wasn't very pleasant. It was harsh. The day I was speaking to Michael Hudson and another inmate that morning, and they were all everybody was just normal morning. Everybody running around outside doing recreation, coming back inside and whatnot. So I was talking to him, and then the individual who ended up killing him, he ended up going to talk to the person because the man came up. He said, "Hey, let me talk to KO," which is Michael Hudson's nickname. And he said, "Let me talk to KO for a moment." And I was like, "Okay." So me and my friend was sitting there talking, and just out of nowhere, he just hits him like, I think it was like more like in the back of the neck or towards the shoulder, like in between the shoulder and the neck. And he would have hit him with a knife. I didn't see the knife at first; it was so fast, and I didn't catch on to what was going on. And Michael Hudson, he had a delayed reaction till he stabbed him again, and then he tried to run, and the door to the wing, to leave the wing, was closed. It was locked. So he tried to move and run, and he kept getting stabbed and trying to get his bearings together to try to defend himself. And when he would pause, you know, he'd probably already been stabbed about 6 times, you know, once in like the upper body and the back when he was running. He fell probably about 2 or 3 times. And the last time he was on his back with his feet up to defend himself.
Mm-hmm.
The man, he tried to get around his legs most of the time. He stabbed him in the abdomen multiple times. And when he got on the side of him, he stabbed him in the head a little bit. He tried to put his arms over his face and his neck, so he had a lot of stab wounds in his arms. Mm-hmm. It was, and this went on for like 3 minutes at least, bare minimum. And eventually he was worn out. He was tired.
So what led up to that, Robert? What led up to that? Do you know?
No, she said what led up to it.
No. What led up to the altercation?
What?
Okay, so essentially he had some confrontation in population with some fellas, and there was a lot of people just not liking him at the moment. You know, he was a very, very vocal man. You know what I mean? Said whatever he wanted to say and so on. You know, but mind you, he's been locked up since he was 15. You know, he didn't learn how to be a man from anybody other than people who are already incarcerated. So earlier, about 3 weeks, I was in my cell and I just heard somebody scream, say, "Oh, KO got jumped. KO got jumped." And I didn't think nothing of it because he's a fighter, you know. I didn't think nothing of it. So I saw out the window officers moving around, and then I heard, "Oh, they just brought KO back." So I seen some people outside I was familiar with, and I went outside to go see what was going on because it seemed like it could lead up to something else involving people I was okay with. And it just turned out that he got jumped twice in front of the housing unit. And all they did was lock up the people who jumped him, which was supposed to be a gang called Stretch Gang. They're just a bunch of young guys, you know, not really as menacing as far as a deadly level, but they were pretty, you know, wild. And so they just locked him up and brought him back to the same housing unit. And we know what they were trying to do. They were trying to assault him in enough times in a short manner to where the administrative staff would force him into protective custody for his own safety, which is a normal custom. You get assaulted a few times, 4 times, whatever, in a very short period of time, they feel like it's unsafe for you to be in general population. And so I guess the third time, like he got hit once, jumped on twice. On the way back, somebody had tried to fight him again on the walkway by the captain's shack, which is up by the chow hall where people go eat meals. And they didn't put Michael Hudson in that seg. They just put him right back in the same cell, the same housing. And there was a lot of rumors about him being, too talkative with officers and too friendly, and a lot of officers didn't like him. We're not gonna dispute that. He was a very happy person and made everyone laugh a lot of times. But as far as why this individual killed him, I imagine it had to have been very personal because he was not a member of Stretch Gang. The leader of Stretch Gang actually spoke with him because I spoke with Michael, and Michael asked me what he should do. And I said, he's 23, Mike. I said, he's on his way home in less than a year. I said, what would you think? What would you want to do? You know what I mean? Like, you can kill him, you can stab him, and he never goes home, and you never go home. Or
Right.
you can
Let me
find
ask
a
you a
way
question,
around
if you don't mind.
Huh?
I don't want to overstep the time because I know we have a time constraint here. I have one question for you, if you could just be brief. You said something that was very intricate. What was said when it was brought to the officers?
Well,
do you know?
The officers told me, Officer Falwell, Sergeant Hobbs, and even Officer McClanahan, they all told me that they tried to get Michael Hudson put in protective custody because they feared he was going to be killed or something, to that nature. And the lieutenant had told them that they just need to let it play out. Oh. And the caseworker, Miss Cynthia Roach, was crying on the phone one day. I went in the back office, and she said she was talking to some of the people in the major hallway, which is like lieutenants and captains and whatnot, and it was trying to get him out of the housing unit into protective custody, and they wouldn't do it. So yes, these were what the officers have spoken and what I witnessed them say to me and get on the phone and talk to the captain and the lieutenant.
I see.
They feared for his life.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for giving up your time to share the recounting of the story of what you witnessed. Coming up next, I want to bring on the mother of Michael Hudson. She's going to say a few words, and she's going to speak about our next steps in regards to what her planning is with her organization. Ms. LaShawn Hudson, are you available? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank
you. That I had a speech. I had down what I was going to say. Every time I hear it, it kind of touched me naturally. Because my thing is still, a parent shouldn't have to bury their child. At the end of the day, that's just not how it's supposed to go, especially when it's involving negligence. That morning on December the 15th, he said it was kind of normal in there for them. It wasn't normal for me. It wasn't normal. They say a mother knows. I feel like I knew, but I just didn't know what it was. I had the weirdest feeling all morning. I got a inbox on Messenger from my niece. She said, Auntie, she said, Michael's been stabbed. She couldn't get her words together, so she retyped it, stabbed bad. So I tried to get in touch. That was at 10:19 that morning. I kept calling the facility, kept calling them, and I couldn't get an answer. I could not get an answer. 17 minutes later, I got an answer. I called up there so much, they knew me. They said, Miss Hudson, hold on. We're trying to get it situated. We're trying to get it organized. Somebody's going to call you. As soon as I said, what's going on? That was the response. I'm like, what do you mean situated? And they hung up on me. That was at 10:36, 10:57. Mr. Dawson called me. He said, I hate to inform you, your son is passed. I said, what you mean passed? You mean my son was murdered? I can't answer that. It's up under investigation. I said, listen, a person is sick, passes. Natural death passes. This was not natural. Who did this? Who's responsible? I cannot answer that. It's under investigation. Later that evening, I got a call from the funeral home. We can cremate him and send him home for you. What? You're not cremating nothing. I'm coming to get my son. He's going to have a funeral. He's going to have a funeral. That's the last thing that I can do for my baby. I'm going to give him a funeral. You hear me? We were supposed to pick him up December the 18th. They stalled us. Didn't know why, but they stalled us. We picked him up December the 19th. It was something about the funeral home. This lady emphasized of what he had on and said, make sure you get it. You probably don't want to see it because it's so bloody, but make sure you get it. And when they scooted my son out, they scooted him out like he was a piece of trash from Columbia University. And they didn't even ask for no criteria of if this was the funeral home, what's going on, nothing, you know? But that stuff wasn't there. So they told us the Department of Corrections came to pick that stuff up the day before. So come to find out, they stalled us just so Department of Corrections could come and pick up the rest of what they had on my son. You get my son to the funeral home, an RN nurse checks him. My son's brains were gone. His heart was gone. His kidneys were gone. His tongue cut out.
Oh my.
Part of his penis had a plug out of it. I mean, like, what's going on here? You tortured my baby. You didn't protect him. You allowed my baby to die. So when I finally did talk to the warden, she says, I don't talk to families. Excuse me? Ma'am, what if this was your son? It couldn't be my son. Oh. I got an attitude, y'all. I have a bad attitude. So yes,
no,
I started.
I understand. I understand. Yes.
She hung up on me. And ever since then, they don't want to answer nothing. I don't care who I call, what I call. I'm still not getting no answers of who killed my son. Or they filing charges. What's the next step? Why is nothing on the Sunshine Law that any attorney could pick up? My attorney calls the prosecutor. He's on vacation. But the lady is like, oh, and everything is so secretive. I don't know what's going on. They have blocked this. They blocked this. Can't nobody get no information. Talking about for the protection of the inmate. Did y'all protect my baby? Did you? No. You think I care about the protection of him? I forgive him. Because you know what? If you look at my hair means something.
They showed the body part, right?
This blonde represents the 30 years I spent with my son. This fuchsia is him transitioning to heaven. And this purple is royalty because he's now with Christ. Without his soul being in his body, it's with Christ. And every day I represent my son. And before he died, he still wasn't thinking of just himself. He thought about these inmates. He used to say, Mama, do you know what I would do just to get a visit? He knew I didn't have a ride. He said, but that's okay. He was so jokative. That runs in my family. I don't care what the situation is. We're smiling. We're making jokes. He said, but that's okay. When I come home, I'm going to start an organization. I'm going to make sure these guys get visits. Women get visits that's in prison. He said, they send us so far out. And I said, I understand. You know, I was 6 hours away. So, you know, if you get 3 visits a year, I was getting none. I said, but I'm going to try to get up there. He said, well, when I get home, I'm going to start a transportation thing to allow families to be able to visit their loved ones. I'm going to try to make it mandatory, you know, that we at least try to get them 2 visits a year. He said, oh, yeah, I forgot you going to hair school. You can do their hair so they can look good for their loved ones. I'm like, yeah, okay. However, now that my son is gone and I know this is what he wanted, and regardless of what he would want me to continue with it, I have actually started a Facebook page of Michael's mother, because I know there's more mothers out there. There's more mothers, and I'm not the only one who's lost a loved one in the facilities, violently or naturally, as they call it. My heart goes out to you. I pray to God for your strength, you know. However, I have started this Facebook page. As I said, it's Michael's Mothers. Send a friend request, inbox me. You need to talk, because and one thing about it, as a mother, you experience the death of your son. There's no timetable on grieving. Some days you may feel like you're fine, like you're doing good, and then you start crying out the blue. You just start crying, you know, because that loved one is not there no more. And not only that, they died alone with no loved one there. No loved one there to hold their hand and say, it's going to be okay, baby. I got you. I got you. You know? I have to take this day by day. I've also started a GoFundMe. And this is the start to being able to get transportation, to allow families to be able to get to their loved ones around the Kansas City area. Yes, we are starting with Licking, but as the people progress and the more people to come in, the donations that come in, we'll try to get more transportation, try to get more prisons. But those visits are needed. That hug is needed. Just to be able to look into your loved one's face is needed. You just don't know. That goes a long way. It goes a very long way. And with that being said, I have to kick in the fact that, hey, I pray that you guys will sign the form and join us October the 5th in Springfield, Missouri area for action, for training, and the next steps. Because we have to plan these next steps. There has to be an action. And for one, there has to be accountability. So with that being said, we have to join in with all of that. Please share it. I know there's mothers out there that need to be able to talk to others that's experienced it. It's one thing to be able to hear a person say, my heart goes out to you, I'm praying to you. But it's another thing for another mother to be able to experience it and know what they're talking about from the heart, from the soul. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, when I say that Facebook page is open, inbox as much as you need. I know how it is. And if nothing else, I'm sticking with you. I'm with you. I'm praying for you. And I'm praying with the rest. At this time, I didn't expect to get this emotional, but I'm going to turn it over to Latrell or Miss Madeline, whoever it goes to. But people, please sign this form to join in for the meeting that's going to be October the 5th in Springfield, Missouri area for action, training, and the next steps. I can't emphasize that enough. Please. And until then, God bless you. You guys have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Hudson. I'm going to go ahead and take it from here. We had a form made up for people to basically leave us their contact information for the next steps in this campaign. So altogether, I think you heard from a few different groups. You heard of Ms. Dana's group with the ex-employees. You also heard from Ms. Hudson, where she is also, collaborating with groups of mothers of impacted people. And, also I have lead the EXPO St. Louis, which is led by impacted people, organized as such. Together, we are EXPO Missouri, and we are building statewide power to be able to address the issues of Missouri prisons. So let me just say this, okay? For so long in the state of Missouri, we go to the politicians with our hat in hand, and we ask them to respect our humanity. We ask them to care about situations like Miss Hudson's, we ask them to care when people say they are being treated inhumanely, that they're being handcuffed to benches for days, that they are being disrespected and treated worse than you would treat a dog. And they smile at us politely, but at the end, they do what's best for the state of Missouri. This campaign is not going to be built on media. This campaign is not going to be built on podcasts. This campaign is not going to be built on asking state politicians to respect our humanity. We are gathering in Springfield, Missouri on October the 5th, where we will basically talk about next steps and training around, and action training around Licking Prison. Our campaign is about prison oversight in the whole state of Missouri. Our demands are, we want accountability for Licking Prison and the death of Michael Hudson. We want a change of leadership. We want the wardens changed. We want the leadership to be changed because it's unacceptable the amount of deaths that prisons in Missouri have, and starting with Licking Prison. We also want reform for the COs. We think that having COs that have no high school diplomas, that are not drug tested, that basically it's almost like they look to find the lowest common denominator, because those people will somehow get pleasure out of being able to control other people. So we think for those reasons, and the fact that prisoners are out of sight, out of mind, they cannot help themselves in most cases, that calls for more oversight, not less. That means there needs to be more stringent oversight, because these people cannot defend themselves. So again, if you would drop your name, there's a lot of people on this call that I know, but there's a lot of people on this call that I don't know. And so if you would drop your name as well as your email in the chat, I didn't have a form, wasn't able to put a form up, but if you would drop your name in the email and the chat, I will contact you and we will give you further information about meeting us in Springfield on October the 5th. So just to reiterate, our three demands are, we want the management or the leadership at Licking, Missouri prisons to be fired. We want a reform in the CO training and culture, and we want independent prison oversight. We don't want oversight that is just another Missouri prison department. We want prison oversight that includes people on the outside of DOC, maybe even some ex-impacted people, some advocacy groups to also participate in the oversight. So this campaign will include, number one, building base to get more people involved, because that's the only thing they're going to listen to is the number of people that you have. And we also want to get connected with as many people on the inside of prison that have these stories as possible. We want to make this an issue in the governor's race. The governor who appoints the director of DOC, who right now is an interim person, he also has to answer for the number of deaths in Missouri prisons. So those are the things that we want. And we need people with boots on the ground in order to get that done. We need people that are willing to travel to rural Missouri to make the connections that needs to be done. In this room right now, we have people from Waynesville, Missouri, Licking, Missouri, Joplin, Kansas City, St. Louis, Webb City. This is the beginning of really building statewide power. So I want to thank everybody that came. Anybody who tried to get in and there was some type of issue, I apologize. To everybody else, thank you very much. And we all can have a good night. I appreciate it. Thank you. You guys have a good night. Something going on funny. It still says that there's 9 people here.